In the 3rd century BCE, the Mediterranean was a chessboard of empires, ambitions, and ancient rivalries. At the heart of it stood two rising powers, Rome and Carthage. One was a land-hungry republic, expanding across the Italian peninsula. The other, a wealthy maritime empire with trading posts stretching from North Africa to Spain. They had coexisted, even signed treaties. But beneath the surface, tension brewed. And in 264 BCE, that tension erupted into the First Punic War, a brutal 23-year conflict that would reshape the ancient world. It all began in Sicily, the island that sat like a stepping stone between the two powers. Rich in grain, strategically located, and politically fragmented, Sicily was a magnet for conflict. The spark came from a group of rogue mercenaries, the Mamertines. Originally hired by Syracuse, they seized the city of Messana and declared independence. Threatened by Syracuse and Carthage, they appealed to Rome for help. Rome saw an opportunity to expand its influence. Carthage saw a threat to its dominance. Both sent forces. The result? A clash at Messana that marked the beginning of open war. According to Nigel Bagnall, in the Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BC, the Mamertine crisis was a local dispute that escalated into a full-scale war due to the strategic importance of Sicily and the ambitions of both powers. Rome's intervention was not just about aiding allies. It was about asserting dominance in a region that Carthage had long considered its own. At this point, Rome had no navy to speak of. Carthage, on the other hand, was a naval powerhouse. Their ships ruled the Western Mediterranean, and their sailors were seasoned veterans. But Rome was nothing if not adaptable. They captured a Carthaginian quinquereme, a massive warship, and used it as a blueprint. Within months, Roman shipyards churned out a fleet. But Rome didn't just copy Carthage. They innovated. They added the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into land battles. Roman soldiers could now storm enemy decks like they were fighting on solid ground. This new tactic paid off at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. Roman commander Gaius Duilius led the fleet into combat, and the corvus proved devastating. Carthaginian ships were boarded and overwhelmed. Rome had won its first major naval victory. It was a turning point. The Republic had proven it could fight and win at sea. Charles River editors note that Rome's transformation into a naval power was one of the most remarkable adaptations in ancient military history. The corvus, while heavy and unwieldy, gave Rome the edge it needed to neutralize Carthage's superior seamanship. Over the next few years, Rome continued to build its navy and push Carthage back. In 256 BCE, they launched an ambitious invasion of North Africa. At Cape Ecnomus, one of the largest naval battles in history, Rome defeated the Carthaginian fleet and landed troops on African soil. The campaign began well. Roman forces won several battles, and Carthage sued for peace. But Rome's terms were harsh, too harsh. Negotiations collapsed. Carthage responded by hiring a Spartan mercenary named Xanthippus. He reorganized their army, trained their troops, and prepared for a counterattack. At the Battle of Bagradas, Xanthippus unleashed war elephants and superior tactics. The Roman army was crushed. Their commander, Marcus Atilius Regulus, was captured. Bagnall describes Regulus's campaign as a bold but ultimately reckless venture that underestimated Carthaginian resilience and overestimated Roman invincibility. The defeat was a sobering moment for Rome, reminding them that victory would not come easily. After the disaster in Africa, Rome shifted its focus back to Sicily. The war dragged on. Rome captured key cities like Panormus, while Carthage held on to strongholds like Lilybaeum and Drepana. Naval battles continued, but storms wreaked havoc on Roman fleets. Twice, entire armadas were lost to the sea. In 249 BCE, Rome suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Drepana. Their fleet was ambushed and dozens of ships were sunk. Morale plummeted. The Senate even considered abandoning naval warfare altogether. But Rome's resilience was unmatched. After years of stalemate, they raised funds from private citizens to build a new fleet, 220 ships fully equipped and crewed. In 241 BCE, this fleet launched a surprise attack on the Carthaginian navy at the Aegates Islands. The battle was swift and decisive. Carthage, exhausted and bankrupt, sued for peace. The terms were brutal. Carthage had to evacuate Sicily, surrender the Lipari Islands, and pay a massive indemnity, 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years. Rome had won. The First Punic War was over. The consequences were enormous. Rome emerged as the dominant naval power in the Western Mediterranean. Sicily became its first province, marking the beginning of Roman imperial expansion. Carthage, humiliated and financially crippled, turned inward. But the bitterness lingered. Among those who fought in the war was a Carthaginian general named Hamilcar Barca. His son Hannibal would grow up vowing revenge against Rome, a vow that would ignite the Second Punic War. The First Punic War was more than a military conflict. It was a test of endurance, innovation, and willpower. Rome had transformed itself from a land-based republic into a maritime empire. Carthage had learned the limits of mercenary warfare and the dangers of underestimating a determined enemy. The war introduced new tactics, technologies, and political strategies that would echo through centuries of Roman history. It also revealed the brutal cost of ambition. Tens of thousands died, cities were razed, fleets were sunk, and yet neither side could afford to stop. The Mediterranean was too valuable, the stakes too high. In the end, Rome's ability to absorb losses, rebuild, and adapt gave it the edge. Carthage, despite its wealth and experience, couldn't match Rome's relentless drive. Bagnall concludes that the First Punic War was a war of attrition, fought not just with swords and ships, but with endurance and political will. It was a war that tested the very foundations of both empires. The legacy of the First Punic War lives on. It was the first chapter in a trilogy of conflicts that would decide the fate of the ancient world. It set the stage for Hannibal's legendary campaign, for Rome's conquest of the Western Mediterranean, and for the eventual destruction of Carthage itself. But in 264 BCE, none of that was certain. All that existed was a small island, a group of mercenaries, and two empires staring each other down. What followed was a war of attrition, of strategy, of sacrifice. And it all began in Sicily. Rome's victory in the First Punic War wasn't just a triumph of arms, it was a triumph of transformation. The Republic had reinvented itself, learned from its failures, and emerged stronger. Carthage, though defeated, had not yet fallen. The rivalry would continue. The blood feud was far from over. And so, as the dust settled over the Mediterranean, one truth became clear: the Age of Rome had begun.